Jam Jam. This is probably, well, I shouldn't lead with this. This is a dick thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's probably one of my favorite moments of this podcast because I have on one of my best friends, one of my childhood lovers, Alie B, Gorrie. And we kind of took a pause with the podcast for a minute because we're in a pandemic and I had other shit to do. But then I was thinking about our upcoming foci, if you will. And one of them is shunya, which we'll get into in a minute. And I thought Alie would be an incredible contribution to this conversation. And we've just added a class called adaptive yoga. So we're really looking at a practice in how to undo our assumptions about how yoga is done and maybe do it a bit better. So Alie is a genius, and I'm gonna pause there and let you share who the hell are you?
Oh, awesome. Hey y'all, I'm Alie B, Gorrie, and I'm a yogi and a yoga teacher and a performing artist, and a disability inclusion advocate and consultant. So I primarily work with arts organizations, educators, businesses on making the world a better place for people with disabilities. I myself happen to have a disability. I have low vision. So I've navigated the world through that lens or lenses for a while, and have learned from that. And I want to make sure that the world is not just more accessible for people with low vision, but for folks with disabilities in general. So that's a little bit about me.
Can you share a little bit about three things? One, yep. Songs for Sight. Two, Able series. And three, what you're currently what you pivoted to, and what you're currently doing with Brassfield and Gorrie.
Yeah. So those are so good. I really, and it took this kind of pandemic to help me sort of realize my own advocacy journey. And it really started when I was a kid. When I was 13, I founded an organization in my hometown in Birmingham called Songs for Sight that gives kids with low vision the technology they need to succeed in school. It gives them support groups and camps and, time and 4 different groups every year to be with other kids with low vision. Most kids with disabilities who are mainstreamed into the public school system don't know other kids with their same disability. So especially with low vision, there's fewer of us. And so it provides those opportunities. And then it also, a portion of those funds goes to research so that kids with eye disease and low vision there can be advances made there. So that's Songs for Sight. I mean, that's when I really started, you don't realize you're doing these things when you're a teenager and in high school, but you're like, oh, I was doing keynotes, but I didn't know they were called keynotes. I just thought it was, speaking for the Kiwanis. So little things like that. And then I went to school, I studied musical theater. It's really interesting when you're in school because if you're studying any kind of art, they really tell you that you can't do anything else. So it's like, oh, you're an advocate? Well, that'll have to wait 4 years because you're ours now. So, and that was fine, I was very into it, but I had to sort of put, not my advocacy aside, but I just couldn't be as immersed as I was as a kid. So I did that for 4 years, and then moved to New York, and I realized there were big gaps that needed to be filled in the theater industry primarily, but I also worked and teamed up with a friend who also had thoughts about these gaps of disability representation in entertainment and film, TV, etc. So we brainstormed and got a series together called Able that discusses disability inclusion in film, TV, theater, and entertainment, and it is a documentary series now on Amazon Prime.
And it's so good, and you need to go watch it. And really quickly, can you share, sorry, I know I had a third Brassfield, but in between that, can you share about the show that you did, the name is, I'm losing the name, but the show you did that was an all-inclusive cast and kind of.
Yeah.
Share about that.
I've done a bunch actually, because once you start doing work like that in New York, your standard for what jobs you'll take changes. Once you're in a show with a cast that is dynamically representative of the world, you're like, oh, well, I don't want to do theater if it's the other way. So a few years ago, I did an off-Broadway show called Bastard Jones, and the cast was, there were, I think, 10 of us in the cast, maybe 9. I should count. It's not that hard. But the cast represented the demographics of America and race, sexuality, gender, and disability. So, you know, at the time, the stats were 2 in 10 Americans have a disability, or 20%. So there were 2 of us in the cast with a disability. It was a show, you know, it was off Broadway. There were so many Broadway veterans in the show. You know, it was just unreal. But it was, you know, so representative of our world, and the show never commented on it. It never was like, hey world, look how woke we are, we're doing this woke piece of theater and we're so cool and dynamic, and isn't it neat that we all look different. It never commented on it. And the show actually was like a rock and roll musical that took place in, like, you know, the times when there were like the, you know, wigs and corsets, but like, who cared? We were black, white, Asian, disabled, trans, like it didn't matter. And so that really changed the game for me in terms of like, oh, if I'm not combining art and advocacy and like doing projects like this, then like, I don't want to do it.
I swear we're going to get to breastfeed and Gorrie, but it does. I was talking to a friend about growing, because you and I both grew up in Alabama, and how growing up, I mean, there are Confederate statues everywhere. Then this is different in terms of like, we're talking about race and inclusion in that regard. But I was saying that, like, as a kid, growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, civil rights epicenter, that never struck me as weird. And it wasn't until the last 2 years that I'm like, oh, fuck, like, that is so weird. Like, you don't go to Germany and there's statues of Hitler. And so this theme, shunya, which, like, the definition we're working with is the blank state of ultimate reality. It's not to be filled, but rather the clearest point to exist from after deep work. And I feel like as a country, we're going through this deep work of like dismantling, tearing down to reside in a void that's not a negative thing, but it's like the equal space, you know, or the blank space of equality. And I feel like that is very analogous to like when we go to theater and we see all white, able-bodied, skinny people. We didn't before question like, well, like, nobody in my life looks like that, you know. Like, I have one friend who looks like that, and then everybody else looks like everybody else, you know, just a variety of being. And so I find that I was so amazed by that show, and I didn't get to see it, but the images that came out, because it really did like bring to the forefront, similar to the statues of like, oh yeah, like, that's not real. This is real. Like, this is how it is. And we don't go around commenting on it. That's just how, that's the void we actually live in. So anyway, loved everything about that. Okay. And Brassfield and Gorrie.
Oh yeah. So now, you know, pandemics happen, I guess. And never thought I'd say that phrase, but they do. And I was living in New York. My lease ended at the end of April, and it just doesn't make sense. There's no theater industry at the moment. There probably won't be one for another year. And I decided I need to pivot. And I actually have a mentor in New York that I've been giving a bunch of, you know, or I've been using this past year to form my own inclusion consulting business. So I speak to keynote, or I give keynotes at organizations and consult with businesses. And so that, those seeds have been planted, but there was a job opening in the corporate responsibility department at Brassfield and Gorrie, a construction company down here in the Southeast. And corporate responsibility is just like a fancy corporate word for equity, diversity, and inclusion. Whatever names. I'm just trying to do the work and not think about that. But it's right now how I'm kind of using my advocacy skills in a different light, and it's tricky and challenging and good, and I'm figuring it out, you know?
I think one of the things you and I connect with a ton on is Brene Brown. I think we have a whole thread from maybe 4 years ago.
There. Yeah.
We probably have a whole epic thread about Brene Brown quotes from about 4 years ago. And I think what you're doing so beautifully is embracing the hyphen, and like what you learned in college wasn't true, and that you can be all those things. They're just in each other's respective time frames. And like, I think as your friend, you know, this is going to be 1-2 years that will be very formative, but also a blip on the radar of all that you do.
That's what we have to remind ourselves. I like, you know, I've been in New York for 5 years and it feels like 5 minutes. So I'm like, this will pass. Like, it feels like every day is a little long at the moment, but in the grand scheme, it'll be just fine.
Just fine. So what you hit on there with Brassfield and Gorrie, and like the department that you're in, equity, inclusion, and diversity.
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about going back to low vision and where maybe disability lies in equity, inclusion, and diversity, and your experience of that, maybe improving my language on that.
Yeah.
Just kind of go hoard, girl, go hoard on it.
Well, typically, I mean, let's be real. For all of you who are watching, the millions of you who subscribe to this podcast, by the way, millions. Billions. So we know often when corporate, you know, or companies talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, a lot of times we're talking about race, we're talking about gender, we might talk about age or like, you know, sexuality, but like disability is rarely in the mix. Disability typically gets the last seat at any equity, diversity, and inclusion table. And it's really interesting because, you know, people with disabilities make up the largest minority in the world. We're actually 26% of the people in the United States. And disability is like, it's the only club anyone can join at any time. It doesn't matter if you're gay, if you're white, if you're Black, you know, something could happen to you tomorrow and you're in the club. So it's interesting because it is still very behind in the fight for true inclusion. And everyone's like, oh, we have acts like the ADA, we have these laws, right, that make the world more accessible. But the truth is, accessible doesn't mean inclusive. Like, they're not synonymous. And just because a place is accessible, like I always say that, you know, if a place is accessible, it's like being invited to a party. But we've all been invited to a party and like you're at the punch bowl, like texting, being like, and like no one gives a care, like, you know. But if you're really inclusive, then you're like out in the dance floor, someone grabs you by the hand and they're like, let's go, let's tear it up, and you feel like you belong there. There's a sense of belonging that comes with inclusion that doesn't go with accessibility necessarily. So yeah, that's sort of the framework of disability in the equity, diversity, inclusion world. And I wish that it had a better seat, but it's getting there, it's trying, but it's definitely lagging significantly behind.
Dang. Yeah, I love the this time period. I've been telling people, like, people ask how you are and you're like, wow, do you want to know? But
you got a minute?
Yeah, like, should we sit down? But I've been trying to say it's hard. It's not bad, it's hard. And like those things aren't synonymous. Hard isn't synonymous with bad. And I think we do that so often. We make assumptions about language where accessible we equate to inclusive. And that,
yeah,
I love your example of the party because that's so real. And also, how many parties have I sat at the punch, like, not even texting because I hate fucking phones. So I'm just like drinking all the punch. Who drank all that girl?
Like corner girl. Yeah. Oh yeah. And I mean, one other thing too, while we're on this like sort of language educator mode, there are a few things that if we're ever talking about disability, I just like to, little nuggets that I just like want folks to hold on to. But when we're talking about disability, I hope that, especially in whatever world we're talking about, right? We could be talking about it in the yoga world, we could be talking about it in the arts, we could be talking about it in business, whatever. But there's two ways to sort of view disability. And there's two models. One is the medical model, and then the one that I operate out of, and hopefully we can get our world to operate out of, is the social model. And a medical model of disability says the person with the disability is the problem, and like they need to be fixed or cured, or like we always need to help them, and they're like dependent, and they're not capable, and they can't make their own choices. And then the social model says, oh no, like the person with the disability is not the problem. The problem is that they live in a society that was not designed with them in mind. So it's like the world around you is the problem, not the disability. And I think a lot of our maybe the people that are older than us in our lives, parents, grandparents, whatever, grew up in a world where it was like, oh, we don't talk about that. Like, bless their heart, like they're so, like we can't stare at them, we can't look at them, like we can't, like, get away, people. And we have to really take a hard look at the way we view disability, because you know, we all make assumptions, we all have biases, but hopefully we can start seeing the world around us as an issue and not, you know, a wheelchair or a cane or a guide dog or, you know, an accommodation request. So just a little nugget for you.
I love that. Thank you. Do you still teach on the word disability? Like when you educate people, or do you use?
Yes.
Yeah, so
It's
you
a
do
big
use the word.
movement to say the word, right? So one of my favorite disability rights activists, his name's Lawrence Carter Long, and he's out with all the cool activists in Berkeley, but there's a big campaign called Say the Word, like say disability. There have been so many words created by non-disabled people to make themselves feel better about disability, which, by the way, fun fact, you're either disabled or non-disabled. A lot of times we'll be like, oh, I'm able or whatever, but actually disabled people are pretty able. So if you're a fun, like, little word for allies is, oh, I'm just a non-disabled, you know, woman, or I'm a, you know, so that's a fun little nugget. But in terms of like language, that disabled and non-disabled is something I educate on a lot, but also just saying the word disability, right? Like even in the 90s, there were words that were created by non-disabled people, like handy-capable, or like, I know, gross, right? Or differently abled. And that one was like PC for a while until it wasn't, you know, it's just like anything. We kind of have to learn how language changes over time and just be cool with like unlearning and relearning. Like I have low vision, but I grew up and I was told that I was visually impaired. So like I still sometimes say visually impaired, even though the most inclusive word is low vision. So, you know, I mean, we all grew up with different language, and we are constantly learning and relearning. And once we learn, like once you know something, you can't unknow it. You just got to work it in.
I think people get it, and people struggle to change, period. But I think people get really nervous, myself included, about saying the wrong thing, or you know, people of color. Do you call your friends who are black, or do you call them African American? And I know it does show up a little bit more in the older generation, but I actually think our generation too gets a little butt clinchy when they're called out on it, you know. But I think it's no different than like language changes. Like we used to say shit like groovy or peachy keen, and like we don't say that shit anymore. And like the F word, like 20 years ago, if you said the F word on a broadcast, like you could have, like, there were parts of time in history where you could be arrested for that shit.
Yeah.
You know, and now it's like we say the F word like part of a normal sentence all the time. Actually, my Magnolia said it the other day, and I was like, I don't have an issue, but I probably can't send you to preschool like that. So yeah, I think it's something that we have to like take the emotion out of it. It's just language changing, and language always changes, which I do actually say groovy, but look at me, I would, you know what I mean? I would. Wearing a bra, like, I would say that. So anyway, okay, thank you. So can you share a little bit about your personal experience as someone with low vision in the yoga community? And can you also maybe zoom out a little bit? Because I think when we talk about disability, we have to remember that's a really large topic, just like race, just like gender. Like just because you're black doesn't mean you have the same opinions and feelings as other black people. Just because I'm Jewish, same thing, right? So the same thing is true for disability. And then on top of that, you know, you might have CP or you might have low vision. So your capacities are different. Yeah. So could you talk about your experience and then that like broader view?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, I'd gone to yoga class or whatever off and on since maybe high school, but I never was like a diehard until I moved to New York in like 2015. When I had horrible migraines with low vision, it's just sort of part of the territory, and like a lot of head and neck issues. And so I'd had doctors and I would go to all the woo woo kind of doctors, you know, like I'm like here for like give me craniosacral therapy, like give me like let's go, let's take some weird vitamins, like, you know, let's go. And so I'd had doctors in the past be like, look, this is really rough and it's going to be rough, but I think what I would prescribe for you is a, you know, twice weekly yoga class. And I was like, whatever. I didn't listen because I was like, I want to go on runs because like hashtag Broadway body, which is such a mess. But anyway, so when I moved to New York, I had a friend invite me to a yoga studio that she said, Alie B, I think this is you. Like, it's like you just like walked in here and threw up on the floor because there's like glitter all over the floor. So I was like, neat, like I'm in. And I went, and it was the first time I had ever been to a yoga class that had like the harmonium and chanting and music and pranayama, and I mean it was just so layered, and like all of there were just so many limbs of yoga represented in the class that was come on limbs,
Come on, man.
come on limbs, that wasn't just, you know, the physical practice. And I was like, what is this? Like, this is not yoga that I experienced in the South, that's for sure. It's not like, all right, y'all, we're gonna do
All
some
right,
y'all.
we're gonna tailor this to we're gonna tailor this only to the things we believe in, and we're gonna do a lot of push-ups. Here we go.
I mean, it was very different than I'd ever experienced. And so I was like, okay, I can get down with this. Like, this is pretty dynamic and fun. And when we got into it, it appealed to my little like dancer / movement self because it just felt so fluid. And I was like, I'm actually like in my body. And I was like, other times when I work out, I'm trying to like run away from my body. So it was just a very interesting thing. And there was no teacher also at this, there was no one in the front like doing it. So for me, it was cool as someone with low vision because I was just going on what I heard and like what I felt via hands-on cueing. And like, you know, what I could see from the person in front of me. Other than that, I was like, okay, like here we go, which like it might be a scary thing, but I actually really loved it because I base so much of things on what I hear. And I found it more accessible that there wasn't someone like, okay, watch me, because that's like the two worst words ever for me. Like, just look over here. I'm like, neat.
I'm gonna turn my head and and I'm gonna mind it for you.
I do a lot of this. So I was very fascinated anyway. I like kept practicing. And I would tell the teachers at the beginning of every class, like, I have low vision. I'm gonna, you know, put my mat in the front few rows or whatever so I can see. And they were like, I mean, I don't think you'll need to worry about that because they, again, the studio, like, they're not doing it. So, but I was like, please feel free to give me hands-on. I had a teacher in college, doing musical theater and dance. I had an amazing instructor who was a dance teacher, a modern dance teacher, who would like work with me and like help me feel things physically, like with all these like different hands-on cues. And like we'd get on the floor and do like a certain leap, like, but do it on the floor and like really feel it in our bodies. So I told the teachers at the studio, I was like, look, like, put your hands, like, just like, let me know what this is if I'm really off. Like I have enough body awareness that I think I'll be good, but whatever. And so I sort of let the teachers know, just like when you're a kid in school and you have to fight for your accommodations, or like you have to give the little speech of like, I need large print. Like I had to do that in my yoga classes. But because I did that, I got what I needed. A lot of people with disabilities, I mean, it sucks to have to advocate for yourself all the time, to be honest. Like it would be really nice to just like go one day without being like, I have a thing, but whatever. I'm not going to like ruin my class experience. So anyway, I've continued to practice for a few years, ended up working at the front desk of multiple yoga studios in New York. So got that swanky membership, cleaned a lot of toilets and did a lot of chaturangas, and just fell in love with like the community aspect of yoga also. And like, it felt like kind of church to me. And I was here for it. I was going to kirtans. I was, you know, going to workshops, learning about different, you know, pranayama. I mean, I was so into it. So then I got my teacher training. But there are times when classes are really inaccessible. Because I know you mentioned like the disability community at large. And I think the biggest pivot that if I could like bring all of these yogis and yoga community folks into a room, I would say to design classes with access in mind. So a lot of times accessibility is an afterthought. And in reality, if you design with access in mind, it can be an asset. So like you have to see cueing with like varieties of cueing, varieties of modifications, different, you know, ways of hands-on or tactile, or like finding these different accessible ways into poses. Like, for example, I mean, I can balance better on my head and or on my hands and an arm balance than on in tree pose. Like, that's just my reality as a person with low vision. So like, if I'm doing a lot of balances on one leg, like, you better believe I'm going to be by a wall, because why? Like, if I'm trying to like chill out my little brain here, I don't need to be taking a nosedive every 5 seconds. I mean, I love falling, but like, I'm going to give myself a class by a wall just in case. Like, and that's so much, sometimes I feel like that's seen as like, oh, like you're like, you need like a cop out, or like a, like, you know, like I will always do eagle pose with a block next to my foot, so I can like rest my little foot on there, because I'm like, if I want to go deeper, I can't do that if my eyes are like fighting to do their job.
Right.
So like, I'm going to give myself, and if I have disabled students in my classes, or, you know, I'm working with like, because I've now, you know, teach yoga to folks with low vision. And so I'm like, look, use what you got, like make a prop mountain, like, let's go. But oh, I always have a prop mountain, but like, design your class with that in mind. So that way, like, maybe the first thing you cue is the accessible way in, and then you cue, you know.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Do you, so I guess with the time we have left, because your time is precious and I want to honor that. Are there questions? So, okay, wait, I have 2 questions. One is, when is being inclusive not inclusive, right? Like, when I offer everything I know no longer inclusive and just like not helpful? Does that make sense? And then what are some things, when you said advocating for yourself all the time, like, what is either a thought process we can have or questions we can ask, so that I'm not having to wait for my students to advocate to me? I'm asking good questions either in the lobby, so maybe it's not in front of the class. Like, because one thing we talk about in our teacher training is like, it used to be very vogue to be like, okay, any injuries I need to know about? Well, holy fuck. Yeah, if someone's like, well, is this traumatized? Or like, no one's raising their hand, right? You know? Right. So what are some, how is it that it might become exclusive if we're too inclusive? Like, how can we maybe frame it to be inclusive in the right ways? And then what are some ways we can either structure our thought patterns or ask good questions so our students don't have to keep advocating for themselves? We advocate for them.
Yes, the easiest way in, and I say this like in any, like in when I talk to anyone, be it like a business, a person holding auditions, like, it doesn't matter. So when people are signing up for class, on your registration form, have a place where you can say like, do you have any accessibility needs? Because that way they get to make the choice whether to disclose or not to disclose their disability. But let me tell you what, whenever I've been to New York, and I've been turned away at several acting studios because, like, you know, just say I was doing on-camera acting, but I can't see the camera. Well, they're like, I can't teach you. Oh yeah, it's so fun. It's really true. But the studio that has really like pushed me and been the most hard-ass studio where I currently study, or where I will study when I go back, it was the first time in my life, and I had been in New York for like 3-4 years at the time. And the teacher like wrote, you know, on the form, like, what do you need to be successful in class? Like, do you have any accessibility? Or like, I actually know now she says that because I make her do that. But before, it literally just said on the form, like, is there anything else you want me to know? And I told her about my disability. And then the first day I was in class, all of my materials were in large print. And that had never happened to me in 4 years of being in New York. So truly just having a space for your students to say, like, I mean, I would frankly say, do you have any access needs? Because that puts them in charge, and like, it's not your responsibility to like figure it out. But it makes you so relieved as a person with a disability to see that like someone's thought of you, or like someone has taken the time to like do that. And then if someone does have those access needs, don't just be like Alie B, the front desk girl, and put it in Mind Body under notes and like pray that your teachers read it. Like, make sure that whoever's teaching the class is cool with it and like knows what's up. Or, I mean, hopefully the person, like, you know, maybe we'll have a talk with that teacher, but if that is stated ahead of time, like, and if a teacher came up to me and was like, hey, I saw that like you have low vision. Is there any way I could help? You know, it doesn't feel intrusive. It actually is awesome. So that's a really simple way in. It's really, it gets to be overkill when like you're the only student like getting special cues or attention, or like my best teachers let me fall all over the place. You know, like, I mean, I was just telling you before we recorded this that I was, you know, doing an inversion workshop last night, and like definitely forward rolled out of some poses, like whatever, forearm stand. I was like, oh, going down. And like, thank God for Zoom, because like there wasn't like the loud noise, but we were on mute. But like, you know, I like was talking to my teacher afterwards, and I was like, what a neat moment that was. It was like, take a tumble. And she was like, yeah, like, but what's new, you know? Because like, you also just have to give them the space to figure things out in their own bodies, because it's going to be different. And it's good. I mean, everyone's practice is different in their body, but giving them space, but also not being afraid to be like, oh, if they tell you what you need, A, believe them, and B, be like, hey, like, what's up? And once you have a relationship with that student, like, you won't have to ask them all the time. You'll just know. Or if they're taking 8 blocks, she'll just be like, neat. Like, honey, I'm taking 8 blocks today. Like 4 straps, 6 bolsters. Like, she's making a castle. It's fine.
I think with that, I have so much opportunity to continue to be more inclusive. And what it reminds me of in my limited experience is that when I have pregnant students, like when I was pregnant, I didn't want to take a prenatal class. Like, that's just not my practice. But I did need a little help, you know, and most people don't know much about how to serve pregnant people, which is fine, but pregnancy is considered a disability in the United States, which is hilarious. So anyway, you know, no one would say anything to me. They're just like, well, obviously you're carrying a 20-pound weight in your belly, but we're going to ignore you. And I've tried to take up the practice of when I know someone's pregnant, I don't say like, Alie B, this is for you. But instead I'm like, if you are carrying a small child in your belly, either from lunch or for 6 months now, try this, you know, and I'll try not to call them out, because also something interesting about pregnancy is similar to disability. It might not be visible. You might have a disability that people don't know, everybody else doesn't know about, but to like call you out, like, Alie B, the low vision woman in the room.
Like, you know, take a kickstand for your tree pose, just kickstand. No. Well, and what I love is one of my favorite teachers will always be like, and here's like she'll demo something, or maybe if it's a new pose or like a peak pose or something, but then she'll be like, and here's a really accessible way in. And then like, I'll look at her and be like, you know, or like, or, you know, subtle things like this, right? Because again, my disability, like, you might know it, like some days I'm real cross-eyed and some days I'm not. So like, it's fine. But like, if there's a demo happening, oh, guess where we're all going to watch the demo? On my mat. Like, she'll get on my mat and do it, you know, like there's so many little subtle ways in, or like you'll give someone a hands-on, or like, you know, if you have someone, you know, who needs to be closer to you as a teacher, like maybe if you have someone who is like lowercase d deaf, or, you know, has hearing loss, like you're not going to amble around the room the whole time. Like there's just certain situations where you might not see the disability, but yeah, there are easy fixes that don't involve like the like you know.
Well, I also think, bringing it full circle, this idea of like being in the void is stripping down the assumptions. Like, yoga has become this thing for white, able-bodied, you know, cisgender, heteronormative females, and it's stripping it back down, which I think actually as a yoga teacher, that's going to force me to be a better teacher. To live in the space where like of true equality, which is like anything is possible. So teach to the possibility, not to the narrow margin that we've established as the norm, which is actually like the most narrow margin of them all. So yeah, I do want to respect your time, but I cannot thank you enough. This has been so helpful, and I hope everyone listens to this, but I hope yoga teachers, because we need to lead the way to be better. Is there any last like moment you want to have? Do you want to have a moment, or like anything you want to say?
I mean, I feel like we've had so many moments in this time, but
I thought we were talking about like our lives. I was like, yeah, we
really have. We've had a lot of moments, really, really tender times. But if I know, if if anyone listening, watching, etc., wants to know more or wants to connect, like, please do, because I could talk about this. Like, a lot of people with disabilities, again, are like, I don't want to talk about this. Like, I'm so annoyed, or like, this is really obnoxious, or like, please don't talk about it. But like, if you say the word disability, my like little ears like go up. So like, I'm here to talk about it and get really uncomfortable with you, because like, we're all like yogis, so we like are working on our sitting with uncomfortableness, or at least I pray we are.
Some of us are. But okay, how do people contact you? What's the best way to reach out?
Find me on the gram, y'all, at Alie BG on Instagram, or just email me. I have a little inclusion related email, so it's inclusion@aliebgorrie.com, and hit me up and we can talk and text and, you know, DM, slide in.
Or voice text.
Yeah, I love a voice memo. So if I get a voice memo from like a phantom voice from Indy, I'll know that you listen to the podcast.
You listen.
So amazing. But I would love to hear what you think.
Well, Alie, I love you so much. Thank you for the work you're doing in the world. You are.
Love you too. What a treat.
I mean, seriously, what a forking treat. Thank you so, so much. I love you. Reach out to Alie B. She's a genius. Genius. And I'm going to turn this off so I can talk to you as a human now. So thanks, Practice Indy. Alie.